Now, just before the break, we were talking about the rising cost of living and how you and me, consumers, ordinary citizens, are starting to feel the pinch even more as we're seeing inflation on the rise, fuel prices at our pumps, and also looming interest rate hikes on the horizon. Well, we're now joined by the Chairman and Group CEO of 360 Global Solutions Group, Mr. Khandani Msibi. Thank you so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Peter, for having me, and happy Easter to you and the listeners.
All right. So as a businessman, you would see what's happening on the ground because consumers are out there engaging with your businesses and you see what's happening in the business environment. Just how hard have things started to become from your own observations?
I think, Peter, we've been on a very hard 2 to 3 years, both as businesses, as consumers. You'd remember that the tragedy started with the COVID-19, which is still with us, and it's not yet gone. And then we had the KZN riots last year. And then we have this war in Ukraine that has actually put the world on a tailspin. And sadly, we have the KZN floods, right? So it actually means that we've been taking punches, both as consumers as well as business, and they're becoming left, right, and center. So it's been tough, and now we have this inflation that has been triggered by the increase in the oil price and then increase in fuel that is running rampage in not only in South Africa but throughout the world. In fact, we're seeing that the whole question of inflation has become a major factor in the elections in the US that is coming in November for the Senate. But in South Africa, we were seeing a lot of misery that is actually growing as a result of this inflation as well.
And, let's start with the fuel price, because what that means is that our mode of transport for the majority of South Africans, millions of South Africans every single day, is they've got to get on these taxis. The prices of fares will definitely go up, again impacting because people's salaries aren't going up.
People's salaries aren't going up at the rate at which prices are going up. In fact, in South Africa, we tend to have this national inflation statistics. But I kind of that it is not the basket of goods that are in that basket are not representative necessarily of the majority of people, because I mean for someone who is earning the top 1%, who are in the top 1% of income in South Africa, they don't feel the movement of prices. But someone who's on a minimum wage, right, food and transport tends to make a significant part of their expenditure, and those two commodities have been under severe pressure for quite a long time, or especially in the past 3 to 6 months as a result of the changes happening.
You're a businessman first and foremost, and small businesses can't absorb a lot of these price shocks, particularly things like fuel. And then they have to pass it on to the consumer, which affects their businesses. This must be hitting particularly small businesses quite hard right now.
It is indeed. In fact, the irony in South Africa, Peter, is that a small business, they rely on loans, and because they're small, they tend to pay very high interest rate in comparison to big business. And the Reserve Bank has this one instrument, this one hammer that they use whenever inflation is going up. They raise interest rate, which is actually having the same effect of increasing cost for business and increasing cost for consumers. So it actually means that both the consumers and business are hit with a double whammy. Now, if you had to look at countries like the US, where they've been printing cash and they've been able to achieve unemployment levels that are below 3% as a result of their stimulus. One can understand when they raise interest rate in order to cool off demand-driven inflation. But in South Africa, we don't have demand-driven inflation. Our inflation is driven by administered prices. I mean, if inflation is driven by the price of petrol, it doesn't matter how much you increase the interest rate. I mean, our consumption of a petrol is inelastic, and it is not going to be influenced by how much interest rate you have to charge us. The only impact of the interest rate impact is that it will worsen the situation for both the business as well as for consumers, in that we're spending more money than we used to in the past to buy necessities, but at the same time, through a higher interest rate, we are now paying much more for the loans that we have with the financial institutions.
It seems that a lot of our woes are of a global nature. First the pandemic, then it was, we're talking about Ukraine, as you've just mentioned, grain imports, fertilizer imports affecting the agricultural sector, fuel prices going up, affecting pretty much everything. So is there anything we can do locally to mitigate these global effects?
Look, I mean, we are part of the global world. And there are certain mistakes that we have made in the past in terms of creating absolute dependence on outsiders. I mean, this country used to be self-sufficient with food to a large extent during the isolation years. And countries like Zimbabwe, who are our neighbors, used to also be self-sufficient and supply with certain crops. I think over the past 20 years or so, we've made ourselves rely more on the world. And again, the point you make raises the question of how do raising interest rates actually solve the problem, except to actually intensify the misery for both business and consumers. So we're at a point where the leaders that run both the Reserve Bank and the State of South Africa should be reconsidering the tools that they use, right? Because if you use a tool that is taking more money out of the hands of a business and out of the hands of consumers in an economy that has been depressed for a long time with very high levels of unemployment, you're not helping the situation. The average consumer in South Africa, the average worker, has become a breadwinner for a lot more for more families than just his own family. But life has to go on, you know. So there's things that people can do at their private levels. One, the issue of working from home. I think we need to embrace that, because that eliminates the need for transport cost. So wherever employers are able to enable you to work from home, embrace it, because it will save you transport money. And two, this whole thing of buying clubs should not just be for December. I mean, it's something that people should do on a continuous basis. And in some cases, work on reducing the cost of packaging, you know, whereby you buy a 5-liter commodity and then decant it amongst yourselves and keep your old 1 liter and decant, because a lot of costs in the small packages that we buy are actually packaging and not necessarily the content. And we're looking for the content, and people need to reduce unnecessary consumption. Alcohol not necessary, cigarette not necessary, because now we have to conserve whatever the little that you have in order to stretch it so that it lasts a bit longer than the current environment dictates.
All right. Sadly, millions of people are earning peanuts, and that's why the debate on the basic income grant, minimum wage. And so we talk about reducing consumption, but there are people getting into debt just to survive. And then it becomes an endless cycle because they borrow more money. Is there a way to stop that? Or is this just something that we have to accept is part of South African life?
Well, look, we don't have to accept it. We have to continuously deal with it. We have to continuously confront it. I think the question of people living on a social grants, the strategy of conserving or rather reduce expenditure should be the only strategy that they can amongst the only strategies that they can pursue. Because if you're adding 315, and that's all you have to live through till the end of the month. You have to find ways and means in which you can stretch it. Otherwise, you don't have any other option. But for those who work, even clubbing with those who are earning social grants in order to create buying clubs, can actually help both that are employed and those that are living on a social grants. We can't give up. Because the alternative is really giving up. But there's the small things that we can do. I mean, we do realize that a lot of alcohol sales happens in areas that are the most poverty-stricken, and I think if our people can reduce the extent to which they take alcohol and not rely on it to actually mask their miseries and begin to save that money for necessities, because you need to have necessities in order to live. There's basic things that you can't live without, but you can certainly live without alcohol and cigarette.
Mr. Msibi, thank you so much indeed for joining us. I know that on a special day like this, you're with your family, so we're going to release you back into their custody. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome, and thank you very much, Peter, and good evening.
Good evening to you. All right, that's businessman Khandani Msibi speaking to us about the challenges that citizens like you and me are going through as inflation hits, prices are going up, salaries aren't going up, petrol's going up, you name it, all bringing untold challenges, suffering even, to millions of people across the country.